Morning. This is awesome. We've been packing a lot in. There's so much to celebrate. There's so much to experience together. I'm grateful for it. Also, last week at Shine 365, we had a chance to fill out on those yellow cards one gifting or skill or some way you would be willing to serve. Those yellow cards are still out on the welcome desk out there, along with baskets that you can fill those out and put in the basket. And we're going to find ways that we as a church can love and serve each other and love and serve our community. One quick note, though, regardless of gifting, our kids are all of our responsibility. So when Lynn mentions that we have a bunch of spaces that need filled, we're going to fill those spaces, right? Because those kids are all of our responsibility. So we want to do that and be a part of their faith formation as we watch them grow in our midst, and maybe we get to see the fruition of the promises of baptism come to their profession of faith as well. All right, I want to start with a question. Do you have a nickname? Nicknames can be amazing. All right, I want you to take 20 seconds and swap nicknames with the people around you real quick, just to see who has a nickname, who doesn't. 20 seconds. Keep it clean. This is a family program. Okay, some of you are terribly embarrassed right now. The laughter and chuckles that are going through the community here. This is great. Well, I have a nickname, and I'm going to share it with you just so we're all on the same playing field here, because I've had a nickname that's followed me my entire life, basically until we ended up in Grand Haven. Some of you know my nickname, but some of you don't. I grew up in the Cleveland area, and I spent most of my teens and 20s in rock bands or other performing groups just as a great way to pass the time. It's pretty fun stuff. Now, in high school, I was in an a cappella improv group. You think Pentatonics if you like their Christmas music stuff. I was in a group like that. Now, here's the thing. My friend McKelly is one of the most beautiful humans that I know. He's also wildly eccentric. Actually, here's a picture of me in show choir, just so you have, ammunition. That's me, and then my friend McKelly's in the back there. And McKelly named our a cappella group. This is show choir. This isn't the a cappella group, but he named our a cappella group the Fat Babies with a PH. Okay, so this is context. This is important. I was also in a rock band. Rock band records a CD. We're going to do a CD release party in the city of Cleveland in the club Peabody's Down Under. May it rest in peace. It was an awful place where your feet stuck to the floor as you walked around. But it was a place where we could release our CD to 600 of our closest friends. McKelly says to me, "Chris, if I make you a Fat Babies t-shirt, will you wear it on stage during the CD release party?" I'm like, "Sure, of course, that sounds great, whatever." So McKelly, maybe at this time in his life, wasn't necessarily a great planner, but he grabbed a t-shirt and he grabbed some iron-on letters and he started to iron on some letters. And he gave me the t-shirt about 15 minutes before the concert started. The t-shirt read Fat B because he didn't necessarily space it out real well. So the Fat Babies did not make it on the t-shirt. Instead, it was just Fat B. He says, "Chris, will you wear it?" And I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So I throw on the t-shirt. I wish I had a picture of it for you. I don't. I threw on the t-shirt. It said Fat B. We played a sold-out CD release party. I walk off the stage, and somebody goes, "Great show, Fat B." And I was like, "What?" It didn't register at all with me at all. But now all of a sudden, 600 of my closest friends start calling me Fat B. All right, I'm 11th grade or something like this. Maybe end of 10th grade, beginning of 11th grade. Here's the amazing part. The nickname sticks with me because I moved 300 miles to Grand Rapids for college, but a few of my high school buddies come too. And they bring it with them. I end up with people that are dear friends that didn't know my real name, because it caught like wildfire on the college campus, small college campus, 2,500, something like that. I had professors that had to double check my name before they put my grade in the grade book, because professors knew me by this name instead. It's the nickname that has followed me around until I made it here. This is like the one place nobody followed me here. We bounced back and forth from Cleveland, back to Grand Rapids. It followed me everywhere I went, to the point that like it's part of my personal email address. And there are people that still to this day will call me some version of Fat B. It's part of my story. It's part of who I am. And I love it. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's an absolutely ridiculous story, right? It's a ridiculous nickname, and at the same time, I love it. And so many people in my life who I love and who love me, that's how they refer to me. That's how they know me. Okay, here's the thing. In our passage today, Matthew 16, if you want to find your way there, Simon, one of the disciples, gets a nickname. And he gets it from Jesus. I don't know if like Jesus giving you a nickname like that kind of is intimidating, right? But Simon gets a nickname. Today, this disciple known as Simon, he gets a new name. And he gets it because of a divinely inspired confession that he makes with his mouth. But you need to know the backdrop for this before we actually dig into the story. The backdrop is the city of Caesarea Philippi. It's a booming city in the ancient world. On the northern edge of Israel, it's like 20 to 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. You can see it on the map here in relationship to Jerusalem. The bodies of water, the small bodies of water. Down by Jerusalem, that's the Dead Sea, and up at the top is the Sea of Galilee. The Roman Emperor Augustus, he had given this city to Herod the Great. It was known as Panion at the time. That'll make sense in a second. And he gives it to Herod the Great. And then Herod's son, Philip, changed the name from Panion to Caesarea Philippi. It literally means the Caesar city of Philip. So Philip renames it to honor Caesar and honor himself. And it became the capital for the region that Philip ruled. If you go there today, you can actually see the ruins that are there. There would have been multiple temples here, and there's a giant cave in the bottom left corner of this particular photo. It's on the northernmost border between Israel and Gentile territory. It's on the fringes between the people of God and the world, but not just physically, not just geographically. It's on the fringes religiously as well, standing between the two worlds. Even in Old Testament times, before Jesus, this was a place where there was Baal worship, and the people of God fell into captivity. Because of their Baal worship, God sends them into captivity. This has always been a troublesome place for the people of God. It became known as Panion because it was dedicated as a city to the god of Pan, the Greek god Pan. He's a Greek fertility god. And here there would have been a temple to Caesar. Here there would have been a temple to Zeus. Here there would have been a courtyard for worshiping Pan. It's a city that welcomed every type of pagan worship, including to be the center of some awful ritualistic sacrifices, including child sacrifice. And it's here at the border between God's people and the world that Jesus wants to know, who do you think I am? With the world and with the world's religions as the backdrop, Jesus wants to know if his disciples get it. So with that, you're invited to stand in body or in spirit, however you're able, for the reading of God's word. We're in Matthew chapter 16. We're going to start at verse 13. Hear these words from the book that we love. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" That's another name for Jesus, the Son of Man. They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, Still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may have a seat. Jesus starts with a question about everyone else. Who do they say that I am? And the answers are on a spectrum of great teachers, famous prophets. And even if the names change, many in our world today find Jesus along that same spectrum in some way. He's a great teacher. He was a religious zealot. He was a prophet. There's any type of answer. Jesus seems to ask this question, though, mainly to set up his next question. That's why it really seems important. Okay, sure, but who do you say that I am? Which is a question still posed to us today, right? Who do you say that I am? How about you, disciples? You've been with me all this time as my students. You've observed me. You've learned from me. You now know me. What has God the Father revealed to you about who I am? Now, Simon is important. He's one of the main side characters all throughout the Gospels. He's one of Jesus' closest friends. He's one of the leading disciples. But he's also impulsive, and so he often gets a bad rep, right? If you know any of the stories about him throughout the Gospels, he leaps without thinking so often. But through the teaching, through the miracles, through the prayer, even in the in-between spaces of traveling together, Simon has come to understand who Jesus is. Simon gets it, and he bears witness to what has been revealed to him in this moment. And with his words, he speaks out loud what no one else up to now has said about who Jesus is. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. This is known as the Great Confession. Your translation might say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. They're the same word. Messiah comes from the Hebrew, Christ comes from the Greek. Both mean anointed one, and specifically God's anointed king who will save and sustain. One of my favorite theologians, Frederick Dale Bruner, he says it this way in interpreting Simon's response. He says, Simon is saying, you are the answer. You're the point. You're the last word. You're the meaning. You are it. The Messiah would be a deliverer. And there had been lowercase m messiahs all throughout Israel's history. Prophets, priests, and kings marked as God's deliverers. You know them, Moses or David or Esther. Throughout the Old Testament, God's people, known as the ancient Israelites, they waited and they watched for God's chosen, anointed Savior and deliverer. They were looking for salvation from political oppressors, and they were looking for God's anointed king who would then usher in a kingdom of shalom, of peace, of perfect wholeness. Here, Simon gets it, and he bears witness to it. Jesus is the anointed one. Jesus is the uppercase M Messiah. He's the Christ. Prophet, priest, king, savior, sustainer. And his kingdom of peace comes with him. It's the confession that we're invited to make. We've already sung, Jesus Messiah, Lord of all. We've encountered Jesus, and we've learned that he's the Christ, and we also stand alongside Simon as witnesses. Josiah and Lucy, you make this confession today. We stand with you and say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Proclaim with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus was raised from the dead and you will be saved. The promises of baptism, that God is at work in his covenant people, and we get to claim those promises as our own and say, yes, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So you can come splash around in the water after the service if you want to. Remember your baptisms. Remember your confession that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And even though Jesus was a historical figure who walked the streets of Jerusalem with his disciples, they claim Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and we do too. But to make that claim means we're not making a historical claim about someone who lived 2,000 years ago. Rather, we bear witness to the presence of Christ and his kingdom in our very midst right now. Alive, active by his Holy Spirit, ushering in his kingdom as the saving and sustaining King. Simon's recognition and witness changes who Simon is, just like it changes who we are. He's been changed, and now his role is changed as well. And he's called to something new, and so he gets a nickname. You are Peter. Really, this nickname in English is Rocky. It's so good. I love this so much. It's a play on words because Jesus can be funny, and we don't get that. I like to think Jesus is smirking as he says this. It's so beautiful. Petros. You are Petros. You are Peter. It literally means rock. He gives him the name Rocky. And on this rock, I will build my church. On this rock, the rock of Simon Peter's confession, will stand the church. Because the great confession is sturdy, because the great confession is not about Simon Peter. The great confession is about Jesus, and Jesus is a firm foundation. And Simon Peter then is given a new name and a new role. He's Peter the pointer. He points to Jesus and says, this is the Christ, the Son of the living God. He's the first one. And we fall in line behind him in his tradition, and we point and say, this is the Son of the living God, the Messiah. And through this, Jesus will draw to himself a people. Did you notice that Jesus didn't write a book? Jesus built a community. And then through his disciples, that community continues to be built by God's grace and through the work of his Spirit. It's the community of sinners encountering God's grace in Jesus Christ. It's the community of sinners that say, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's the community called to represent him in the world, poorly as we may do that sometimes. The community then becomes known as the church. Jesus uses the word here. He says, this is the first time church shows up in the New Testament. He says, on this rock, I will build my church. Jesus does not say, on this rock, I will build my churches. He says, on this rock, I will build my church. And those who are in me are one. In the Greek, the word is ecclesia, or ecclesia, however you want to say it. It's literally the called out ones. That Christ calls us out to himself. And no matter how the devil might try to destroy it, and no matter how the world might respond to it, and no matter how we might try to self-sabotage it, this community will persist because there will always be people overwhelmed by the revelation that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And through him we can know life and know it to the full in the pure whole peace of his kingdom. And even the gates of Hades will not overcome it. The gates of Hades, literally the realm of the dead. Where are they again when this is taking place? Do you remember the name of the city? Caesarea Philippi? Let's pull up, Kathy, that picture again. On the fringes between God's people and the world. That cave in the bottom left, here's another picture of it. It's huge. Kathy, go ahead and see if, I did give you that second one, I think. It's a huge cave. This was literally called the gates of Hades. Because the people in the ancient world believed this was the gateway to the underworld. This was the gateway to the realm of the dead. And it's serving as a backdrop as Jesus makes the statement, even the gates of Hades can't overcome this. The disciples knew they were standing at the gates of Hades. And Jesus, here, he blesses Simon Peter with the reality that even death itself cannot overcome the life that is known by his people bound together in his name. This is one reason I confess Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, because I have been overwhelmed by the life that I find in him. Who he is, how he lives, what he calls us into as we follow. I believe he is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and I stumble forward after him, trying my best to follow, even though I'm such a mess of a contradiction. And Peter knows this too, because there is a problem, because Simon Peter has expectations for what it means that Jesus is the Messiah. And Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah, also has expectations for what it means that he's the Messiah. And they're not the same. Israel's vision for the Messiah was beautiful but narrow. And the anointed one would free Israel from political oppression. That was the vision. But God's plan for salvation, restoration, and the kingdom of peace is a vision for the whole world, way beyond political uprising, and it's achieved through self-giving love. The Messiah is going to lay down his life in love. So in the very next story, Peter ends up getting a different nickname. Because Jesus predicts his death. His death on the cross is imminent. He's turning his face towards Jerusalem, which means he's preparing to face his death on the cross. That would ultimately lead to his resurrection. And those looking for Christ and his kingdom, like Simon Peter, cannot fathom the idea that the Christ would suffer. It's impossible. Whatever Peter's vision for the Messiah was, it did not include suffering, and it certainly did not involve death. The suffering Christ, there's no such thing. And Peter says, after Jesus predicts his death, Peter says, "Never, Lord, this will never happen to you." It actually says Simon rebukes Jesus, the one he just called the Messiah. He rebukes him like he's trying to put Jesus in his place. It can't happen because the Messiah does not suffer. But Jesus reveals that he's going to lay down his life and he's going to die for the sins of the world out of his perfect love, and he will conquer sin and death through his death and his resurrection. And the way of the kingdom of peace is different than the way of the world. And if Simon Peter will stand in the way, then he becomes adversary instead of Rocky. And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." How'd you like to get that nickname? You're a stumbling block to me, Jesus says. If that's your stance, then you're an adversary like Satan. Your concerns are not God's concerns. Peter is rocky, and Peter is adversary. Wait a minute, which is it? Is he the one who utters the great confession, or is he the stumbling block? Yes, he's so clearly both. He's so clearly both, and Simon Peter is so clearly all of us. Right? So often we stand with Simon Peter, faith and failings in clear view. Here's the wonder of it all. If you've confessed that Jesus is Lord, you get a new name too. This is the wonder of it all. 1 John chapter 3, he puts it this way: see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God. And that is what we are. Children of God. Josiah, Lucy. Children of God. This is your new nickname. And in the promises of God in your baptism that now come to fruition in your profession, you are children of God. And this new nickname, stemming down from the great confession, becomes your compass and guide. And you are made new every day along with God's family, so that when your failings are just as in clear view as your faith, you circle back to the promises of God and the promises of who Jesus is, as Peter would have to learn how to do. Because it's not on the rock of Peter that the church would be built. It's on the rock of the confession that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of God. And we circle back with faith and failings in hand, and we remember and we're reminded that Jesus Christ is Lord, and our home is with him. And we turn and we walk back, and Jesus welcomes us back in. He says, come, you belong here. And the times that we step in front of Jesus and say, no, it won't happen, and Jesus says, right now you're an adversary, there's the grace to fall back in line and once again remember and proclaim and confess, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You start each day with this new reality that you are a dearly loved child of God. You come back to this reality after losing your way and becoming the adversary. Your home is God's kingdom. Your way forward is to follow Christ. Your motive becomes self-giving love like his, which I promise is a better way to live. And your promise is resurrection life, both now into eternity. This is a very good confession. I pray that you have made it and can make it daily with our students as well, because Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and that changes everything. Would you pray with me?